Thank you all. Thank you very much. God bless you. And I think I've lost my wallet. Gil. No, just kidding. We want to, I think this is going to be a very informative panel today. We've got two very special guests. I'll introduce both of them to you here in a moment. But I want to start by giving you a short brief. Can I get the first slide, please? On how the left operates. Now, why are we here? It's largely because of what we call the Trump effect. You see, the left is very well organized today. You see what they're doing. They're well funded and they're very, very angry. And you look at organizations like Black Lives Matters, anything that George Soros touches, the People for the American Way, which is Right-Wing Watch, for those of you who go to their website on a regular basis, Antifa, and even Hollywood, and we're seeing just a total meltdown now in these places. And of course, they get supported by the mainstream media. And the most sinister organization is the one that deals with hate group mapping. And who is that? The Southern Poverty Law Center. Next slide, please. All right. I'm going to show you a video here that came out Thursday morning. And already this morning, as of 10 minutes ago, it had 1.1 million hits. And it's from Prager University, and you know how their videos go viral. Well, just since Thursday morning, there's 1.1 million hits. Look at this video, please.
Shutting down people you don't agree with is about as un-American as you can get. Rigorous debate, honest discussion, open exchange of ideas, that's the American way. But free thinking and speech are threatened today by a group with a sweet-sounding name that conceals a nefarious purpose. This group is called the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC. Originally founded as a civil rights law firm in 1971, the SPLC reinvented itself in the mid-'80s as a political attack group. Every year now, it produces a new list of people and charities it claims are extremists and haters. Aided by glowing coverage from the establishment media, the SPLC's hate list has become a weapon for taking individuals and groups they disagree with and tarring them with ugly associations. The SPLC employs a two-pronged strategy. First, find a handful of crazies with barely any followers, no address, and no staff, and blow them up into a dangerous movement, proof that there are neo-Nazis lurking everywhere. On their notorious hate map, the SPLC lists 917 separate hate groups in the US. No one has even heard of more than a handful of them. The second strategy of the SPLC is to undermine legitimate political voices that they oppose by associating them with extremists like the KKK. Take the charity known as the Alliance Defending Freedom. The SPLC lists them as a hate group. Is that fair? Well, the ADF has a network of 3,000 attorneys from all across the US who've donated more than 1 million volunteer hours in defense of religious liberty. They've had a role in 49 victories at the US Supreme Court. Putting the Alliance Defending Freedom on a list with 130 Ku Klux Klan chapters is not only wrong, it's malicious. According to the SPLC, one of the most influential social scientists in the US, Charles Murray, is a, quote, white nationalist. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, perhaps the most eloquent spokesperson for the rights of Muslim women, is to the SPLC a toxic anti-Muslim extremist. Scores of other individuals and charities active in mainstream conservative or religious causes have likewise been branded by the Southern Poverty Law Center as threats to society. Mind you, it is entirely fair to disagree with any of those folks, but it is utterly unfair to call them haters or extremists. The largest category listed by the SPLC as extremists, with 623 entries, covers groups like the Tea Party organizations that are wary of centralized government. Last time we checked, favoring smaller government was a mainstream and perfectly honorable American tradition. What is not honorable is the course prescribed by a leader of the SPLC, Mark Potok, who was caught on video proclaiming the organization's true intentions. He told a group of supporters, quote, "The press will describe us as monitoring hate groups. I want to say plainly that our aim in life is to destroy these groups, to completely destroy them. Portraying someone with political views different from your own as a public menace is bullying, and it's a dangerous game. Instead of reducing hate and violence, the SPLC's name-calling directly incites it. In March 2017, Charles Murray was trying to discuss his acclaimed book, Coming Apart, at Middlebury College, when he was violently attacked by protesters inflamed by the SPLC's labeling of him as a racist. A professor escorting Murray ended up in the hospital. In 2012, a gunman attempted mass murder at the Family Research Council and failed only because the first man he shot managed to disarm him. The attacker told the police he acted because the SPLC had listed the Family Research Council as a hate group. It's a vicious irony. While promoting itself as a monitor of hate groups, the SPLC has in practice become a fomentor of hate. Yet the group rolls on, bigger than ever. What keeps them going? For one thing, the establishment media constantly quote them. Scare stories about right-wing stormtroopers are a sure way to attract eyeballs and fit nicely with the media's own preconceptions of the dangerous reactionaries lurking out there in Middle America. Second, alarmism is a great fundraising technique. Convincing people there are fascists everywhere has turned the SPLC into a cash machine. Last year, the group hustled $50 million out of frightened liberal donors, adding to the $368 million of assets they were already sitting on. So the next time you see the Southern Poverty Law Center quoted in the news, just remember, the masterminds behind the SPLC aren't eliminating hate, they are fueling it. I'm Carl Zinsmeister for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video.
Yeah, give Prager a hand. Okay, next slide, please. One of the things they do when they publish this hate list is they list all of us conservative groups, particularly Christian groups, in the same category as the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis, the skinheads, and they use the tactics of Saul Alinsky, which means they isolate a target and they all pile on and they try to destroy that target. Laird Wilcox, who is one of the more renowned investigative reporters, says what they do is a kind of bullying and stalking. And that's out of an article that he wrote. Next slide. They have an annual budget of $45 million and a staff of 291 permanent people and 640 paid contractors with 6 offices. And look at this, an endowment of $319 million. And let me say to you that $319 million was prior to Charlottesville. And then you have people like George Clooney that gave them another $1 million and several industries that gave them some more money. So they're well over that mark right now. 69 million of that is in offshore accounts. They spend about 10 million a year just raising funds, and their hate list is actually a hit list because there's been at least 3 incidents that we can tie to Southern Poverty Law Center's hate mapping. That was the shooting in our building in 2012. Representative Scalise's shooter was going to their website, and they had a page on Scalise, and then Charles Murray, who was at least a professor with him, was roughed up and had to be sent to a hospital because he's listed as a hater on the Southern Poverty Law Center. Next slide. Here's something interesting. The video told you they list 917 hate groups in 2016. And one group is counted 45 times because every chapter in that group is counted as a separate hate group. It's totally fictitious. This is made up. It's phony. And their SPLC numbers of hate groups has risen 48.2% since 2000. But if you look at the FBI statistics on hate crimes, they've dropped 32.2% since 96. This is all phony data coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Next slide. Are they neutral? They claim to be a neutral watchdog. No, they're not neutral. They're actually an arm of the hard left, of the radical left. But people are starting to distance themselves from them. GuideStar, the charity navigator, has dropped SPLC data. The FBI and DOD, or DOMI there, as you see, is the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. They've dropped SPLC's data, and DOJ issued a formal rebuke to them in May of 2016 for some of their shenanigans. It's starting to come apart. It's starting to unravel for them. The problem is they've got so much money and so many lawyers that they have staying power. And then SPLC's target is just ordinary people like us that have unpopular opinions, and then they get labeled as haters, bigots, Islamophobes, and racists. One example, a Minnesota school district where the families in that school district did not want their young children exposed to a very graphic sex education program, band together and created an organization that stood against it. And that organization that they created to stand against the sex ed was actually labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a hate group. That's what they're all about. Next slide. Here's some of the groups. By the way, all these groups are listed as hate groups, and if you look around, you'll see most of these logos on our walls up here. Okay? So we're all in good company. We're in this together. Now, let's see some of the people. Oh, let's see, there's just a sample. There's 8 people. I think 5 of the 8 on there are speaking at this conference. No, 6 of the 8. I'm sorry, Laura Ingham's speaking too. And there are more, okay? Now, I told you they're very wealthy, right? They're very wealthy, and most of their money's down in the Caribbean in offshore accounts down there. Well, let's see if we can figure out where their money is here. Roll it.
We gather our treasure of vast hill and lubber, buried way hay, all the way down. Our loot from donations sent on a vacation, on faraway isles, all the way down. In the Caymans, Bermuda, and BVI, buried way hay, all the way down. Our treasure could reach as high as the sky, on faraway isles, all the way down. We say that we help the American poor, buried way hay, all the way down. But the money we keep, when it's hidden offshore, on faraway isles, all the way down. Shiver me timbers, you discovered me booty. Now what are you gonna do about it, bucko?
Okay. Thank you. Now, our first panelist today is Dr. Carol Swain. I think most of you have seen her in appearances on a variety of different TV programs. She's an award-winning political scientist and a former professor of political science as well as law at Vanderbilt University. She's also a lifetime member of the James Madison Society, which is an international community of scholars affiliated with the James Madison Program in American Ideals and institutions at Princeton University. Before joining the Vanderbilt faculty in 1999, Dr. Swain was a tenured associate professor of politics and public policy at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. She is the author of several books. Her first book was Black Faces, Black Interest, the Representation of African Americans in Congress. Another book that received quite a bit of acclaim was The New White Nationalism in America, Its Challenges to Integration. And she was with us a couple of weeks ago out in Colorado Springs for the Council for National Policy and did a bang-up job giving a tremendous presentation out there. She has become a commentator on radio, where she is associated with Bot Radio and American Family Radio. And it's a privilege to have her with us here today. She has quite a story to tell, so I'll turn this over to Dr. Swain. Welcome her, please.
Greetings from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a Virginian by birth, but if I wasn't a Virginian, I'd be a Texan. And I would be a Texan because Texans know how to fight. There's a reason why they say don't mess with Texas. And today, I'm honored to speak with you all. This is my first time speaking from this platform, but I've spoken before for FRC. And I realize that the people in the audience, as well as those who are watching online, that you are divinely appointed to have this information and to be a part of this movement and this moment. And I'm also very encouraged by the young people that I have met at this summit. We need them so much. I mean, there's some things that we have not done well as part of the older generation, and we need to stand up and do our part so that when we pass the batons on to this young generation, and they're very eager and they're very wise, because if they were not wise, they would not be here. They're here to learn from us. And one of the things I want to tell you is a little bit about myself before I talk about my experience with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And my background is non-traditional. I was born and raised in rural poverty in southwestern Virginia. I was one of 12 children. We all dropped out of school after completing the 8th grade. I married at 16, had my first child at 17, and was a high school dropout, went through a period of depression, and I have quite a story if I say so for myself. But I ended up getting a high school equivalency, went to a community college and got the first of 5 degrees. And I worked full-time while I was getting my bachelor's degree at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. I graduated magna cum laude. And and I didn't just squeak by. At Princeton, my first book won the highest prize in the profession. I won 3 national prizes. I've been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court, and so I was very successful by the academic standards. And then God did his bit of calling me into the kingdom, and this was after I was tenured. And it was also, I became a devout believer after I had accepted the job at Vanderbilt. And so Vanderbilt University did not hire a born-again Christian, but when I showed up for the job, that's what I was. And some of the things that I want you to know about me is that I've always loved my country. I'm proud to be an American. And I have learned that where you start your life does not determine where you end, and that your attitude is more important than your race, gender, or social class. And your thoughts, words, and relationship with Jesus Christ will determine your outcome. And when it comes to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the organizations and individuals that organization has targeted, we don't have to worry about the bullies. My Bible tells me at Isaiah 54:17 that no weapons formed against me shall prosper, that every tongue that rises in judgment thou shalt condemn, for this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. And so those of us who are called, those of us that God has placed in certain positions of responsibility, we need not fear bullies like the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it's an organization that I am intimately familiar with, and part of it was when I was researching my book, The New White Nationalism in America, Its Challenge to Integration, that was published in 2002. And at that time, I knew that they had some shaky criteria for labeling groups, but I did not delve into it at the time. In 2004, 2005, I became interested in immigration research, and almost every group that I wanted to use that research, they were labeled as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I thought that was very curious that these groups, everyone that was an immigration restrictionist, the Southern Poverty Law Center had sort of put them on the watch list or had taken some action to undermine them. And so I noticed that back in mid-2000s, and I thought that was very curious. But what caused me to challenge the Southern Poverty Law Center and for them to retaliate against me was at the time, 2007, I was a contributor, believe it or not, for CNN Lou Dobbs. And they were really going after Lou Dobbs because he was focusing on illegal immigration. And at the same time, they were ignoring the leftist groups that were radical. Now, some of those groups, they had on their hate map, but when they did articles, the articles were almost always about conservatives and about immigration. So summer of 2009, I wrote a blog. Believe it or not, I was writing for the Huffington Post. I haven't been a Republican all of my life. I'm embarrassed to say that like many African Americans, I was born a Democrat. And took me a while to see the light. But and you may recall that in November 2008, the new Black Panther Party, they were patrolling the polling booths in Philadelphia, and they were intimidating white voters with their nightsticks and their paramilitary uniforms. That was taking place where you would think that the Southern Poverty Law Center would write at least one article about this, right? That they would say something, that they would speak up. Well, they didn't. And so in August of 2009, August or September of 2009, I wrote an article, Mission Creep, the Southern Poverty Law Center's Misguided Focus. And I pointed out that they had become a victim of mission creep, that they had lost sight of their original goals, and now they were going after conservatives. And I ended my blog with the line, rather than monitoring hate groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center has become one. And within 6 weeks, I was on the cover of the Tennessean with a headline, something like, VU professor slammed for endorsing racist film. And my crime, you know, of course, you have to commit a crime to get on the list, right? My crime was that I had reviewed a film called A Conversation About Race. And I really liked the film. I liked it because during those times that I did teach courses on race and I used films, they were always the same kind of film. You know, how many times can you show the eyes on the prize? And so I would show those films, but I thought it'd be great for students to see a film that was from the perspective of the other side. And so the filmmaker spoke as a white person who was kind of very much aggrieved at being called racist, and he felt that racism was something that, that people used to beat up white people. And he was critical of white liberals, and he used man-on-the-street interviews, and I thought it was a great film for a classroom discussion. I gave it an enthusiastic review because it was the first time I'd seen a film documentary like that that had the other side. Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center said that the film was racist because it denied racism. And Mark Potok was quoted calling me an apologist for white supremacy. Do I look like an apologist for white supremacy? Do I look like an apologist for white supremacy? And you can imagine that this was 2009, and I did not have the platform that I have today. And it was, you know, like one of those times that I felt like I had been punched in the gut. And I heard myself being discussed on talk radio, and it went viral in the black communities. And it was on the cover of other newspapers in Tennessee, my photograph. And it was a very difficult and dark period of my life because I felt like I was helpless. And James Taranto of the Wall Street Journal, he came to my defense with an article in defense of Carol Swain. And if you Google in defense of Carol Swain, the article will come up. But he wrote an article that really sort of silenced the Southern Poverty Law Center, but it put the matter to rest, and I would say that that was the beginning of the backfire against the Southern Poverty Law Center, because people who know me and knew that it was ridiculous, totally ridiculous. And so I think they overplayed their hand. But that following year, 2010, I was on a panel for the Center for Immigration Studies, and I discussed the Southern Poverty Law Center. Well, they did an article after that where they listed my name in Hate Watch for the same film. And I'm not presently on that list of extremists because, you know, when you come after me, I go back at you. And so maybe they've decided, you know, to leave me alone. But now that I've spoken here, you know, who knows? I may be I'm an extremist now because I have, you know, spoken for FRC. And in any event, I think there are some things that you all can do. And one of the things that we should do is really write our members of Congress. I don't care whether they're Democrats or Republicans, and tell them that the Southern Poverty Law Center has no business being used as experts before Congress. They should not be used by public schools or universities as far as that data. They have no clear criteria for the groups and individuals they include as hate groups or as extremists. And when they go after an individual like me at the time, we don't have a big organization behind us to defend us. And so you can imagine how they wreck lives of people who don't have access to resources to defend themselves. But the most important thing is, if you're doing research and you've been a student, there's some basic criteria you have to use. They have no criteria. They have no scientific criteria for labeling hate groups and for targeting individuals. They are a left-wing, bullying, partisan organization. They should not even be a nonprofit. And so my challenge to you all is to follow through and contact your members of Congress and tell them never, ever use the Southern Poverty Law Center again. Thank you.
What a lady, huh? Yeah, I think she's right. They may have overstepped their bounds when they went after you. Our next panelist is Austin Ruse. He is the president of CFAM, or the Center for Family and Human Rights. It's a research institute and special consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council and with the Organization of American States. His organization has assisted the UN delegations to negotiate documents, both binding and non-binding, for 20 years. Austin travels and lectures widely on United Nations topics. Austin is the author of 2 new books, Fake Science, Exposing the Left's Skewed Statistics, Fuzzy Facts, and Dodgy Data. Did you come up with that name? Published by Regnery also, his other book is The Littlest Suffering Souls, Children Whose Short Lives Point Us to Christ. He lives in Northern Virginia with his wife and children, where his ancestors settled prior to the Revolutionary War. But the best thing about Austin is his wife is a senior fellow with the Family Research Council, Kathy Ruse. And so welcome, Austin Ruse, please.
Just a quick note to the creepy little scribblers of the left who are in the room. You know they're here, furiously taking notes. Well, I want you boys to sharpen your pencils, because there's more stuff coming. Not long ago, I lectured to a bunch of university students here in town about the UN, the development of international law and human rights. Among the new efforts to develop human rights, I discussed sexual orientation and gender identity, the hottest topic anywhere. During the discussion, as I fully expected, all the students wanted to talk about was sexual orientation and gender identity. They were concerned, shocked, and even disgusted that anyone might oppose putting sexual orientation and gender identity as a new category of non-discrimination in international law. It's likely the very first time that they'd heard that homosexuality cannot be adequately defined to create a distinct class of persons, or that something that even gay-friendly academics agree with. It was likely the first time anyone told them that homosexuality is not inborn and that it's certainly not immutable. Well, that one young man smirked. It seemed like all they could do is smirk, these kids. Anyway, he smirked at me and he said, I've got a very tough question and I don't think you're going to like it very much. And I said, let me have it. I think I can take it. And he says, well, what? He was looking at his computer and he says, what do you think about CFAM being designated as a hate group? And there it is, the non-argument par excellence, the piece of information that supersedes all others, the non-argument that ends everything. And I say, welcome to the new blacklist. The purpose of the new blacklist is to make it easier to dismiss critics. If you're on the blacklist, there is no reason to engage you in argument. There's no reason even for you to expect human courtesy. You're on the blacklist. That's all anybody needs to know about you. The purpose of the blacklist is so that any smirking kid can call it up on his computer in a lecture room, belch out the information, and get knowing nods around the room. We don't have to listen to this guy. My organization landed on the Southern Poverty Law Center hate list several years ago because we advised the government of Belize about their obligations under international law with regard to sodomy. Isn't it horrible these days that we have to say the word sodomy in mixed company? And we have to do it all the time. We advised them as professional experts in international law and human rights, and we were right on the law then and now. But this was enough to land us on the SPLC hate list because we advised a foreign government about their treaty obligations. So we're on the blacklist, end of discussion. And it's a neat trick to be able to put your political opponents on a list that precludes you and others from ever having to engage them in argumentation. From that time to this, whenever my group is mentioned in the media, it always comes with the disclaimer, as you know, designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Some months ago, one of my staff members was chosen by the Trump administration as a public sector delegate to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. The pelvic left had a massive and very public aneurysm. Brows were furrowed, breasts were beaten, letters were written, petitions were started, complaints were lodged, and all of this was covered by the mainstream media who dutifully and without reflection or original reporting spat out the words, designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. End of story, end of discussion. A radical group calling itself outright, they used to go by the tonier name, the International Lesbian and Gay Human Rights Commission, issued a dossier on us, a whopping 26 pages long. An anonymous member of the U.S. State Department said he was not aware of the awful things that we had done and said. We apparently have the nasty habit of putting quotation marks around homophobia and transphobia, as if these things do not exist. One may not question whether there are psychological conditions, though neither condition appears as a category in the diagnostic manual. Maybe one day. The dossier quotes me as quoting the teachings of the Catholic Church that homosexuality is objectively disordered. It should be noted that the brave LGBTs have never labeled the church a hate group. They don't have the guts. Our other crimes include citing the work of Dr. Paul McHugh, the longtime head of psychiatry at prestigious Johns Hopkins University, who has said that those with transsexual tendencies don't need hormone treatments or surgical mutilation of otherwise healthy organs, but they need psychological counseling. Our crime was to quote him. Our further crime was to quote statistics from the Center for Disease Control about the exploding number of diseases, new and old, occurring in the LGBT community, along with many other dangerous pathologies. We were quoting the CDC. It is now a hate crime to quote the CDC. I wrote an article for Breitbart about how a professor at the University of Michigan had complained that her autistic daughter had been given hormone blockers, had her breasts amputated, and she believed the surgeon could actually grow her a penis. Again, one of those words that we now say commonly in mixed company. Even telling this sad story is hate speech, according to those on the left. More crimes of ours include denying that homosexuality is inborn and immutable, though the science is fully on the side of these statements. There is no reputable study that shows homosexuality is in the genes, in the brain, or in the epigenetics. Gay-friendly academics have also shown that homosexuality is fluid, so fluid that it can change many times in the life cycle, most especially among women. They say that, but we're a hate group if we say it. We have cited studies that show children do best when raised by their own mom and dad, and that no other coupling or singling will do as well for kids. This is considered a form of hate speech. One of my crimes that has long haunted me is my assertion that sexual orientation and gender identity should not go into UN documents and therefore create a new category of non-discrimination. This is hate speech. The dossier went on and on and on, and if anyone could actually look closely at any of those charges, they would know that none of them rise to the level of hate, let alone blacklisting. And this is why they're all bundled together. I also have 57 mentions in Right Wing Watch. Thank you very much. It's not the most, but it's a good number. The purpose of the blacklist is not to engage, but to silence. It is more than that. It is to warn. It is to warn of contagion. If you work with one of these blacklisted groups or persons, you will become contaminated too. You will be blacklisted too. We will come after you where you live. We will come after you where you work. You may never work again. Even now, a cabal of the pelvic left has started a new list of hate groups that are demanding that the mainstream media refuse to stop quoting them in the press. There's a group called Color of Change, which is going after hate groups and our ability to use Visa and MasterCard. This is the new blacklist. Are you now, or have you ever been a practicing Christian? And whether you know it or not, you're on the list too. Thank you.
We've probably got time for a couple of questions, so I'm gonna ask a couple of questions here as we run to the finish. Austin, Dr. Swain gave a recommendation for what we can do about the Southern Poverty Law Center and groups like that. Do you have any recommendations for this audience today in terms of how they can engage to stop what we see happening?
I do. First of all, I wanted to say something about Trump. You know, is it true that Trump is the first president to come here and speak?
Yeah, a sitting president, yes.
That's just remarkable, and that says so much about him. You know, we love George Bush, and other establishment Republican figures, but we know that they would have run for the hills if they had chosen somebody like one of my staff members for this UN commission. They would not want the criticism from the New York Times. And one of the beautiful things about Trump is he doesn't care. He doesn't care. So my advice to you is, you shouldn't care either. Don't care one bit about what they say. And I would urge you that if you're from St. Louis and they mention one of our groups in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch as a hate group, call that editor and say, hey, how about doing some original reporting? They need to hear from their readers about this use of the hate designation by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I would, if I were you, call your congressman, call your state house, call the editor of the local paper if you see them use the Southern Poverty Law Center. We must put a stake through their credibility.
Dr. Swain? Great.
I would also urge you all to acquaint yourself with the research that's been done, from the website Exposed, SPLC Exposed, and write letters to the editor, get online, use your social media, as well as share these articles, with your friends and relatives, but you can take a proactive stance of challenging them. And the Southern Poverty Law Center is probably the most prominent group, but there are a lot of other leftist groups that work in concert with the media to destroy anyone associated with Judeo-Christian values and principles.
That's right.
And let me reiterate what Dr. Swain just said. Please go to the website, SPLC Exposed. There is a plethora of information there. This little pirate video you saw is on that website, and it is going to be continually updated as things unfold with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, Dr. Swain, I want to go back to you in our final seconds. You said something out in Colorado there to the audience which really resonated, I think, certainly with the white people in the audience, and you said something to the effect that you're always going to be sensitive to being called a racist. Would you repeat that for this audience here, because I think it is a profound thing?
Well, one of the things is that the political left knows that if it uses epithets, if it calls you a racist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, a nativist, it's going to silence people because no one wants to be called, by those names. And I think it's important for white people to know that you're always going to be dismissed as a racist. If Hillary and Bill Clinton and people on the left are called racist by other people on the left, you're going to be called racist, and so you should not allow that to silence you. It's a political tactic. And I also said that every person who wants to change America you need to read Saul Alinsky, and some of his rules can be used by us without compromising our values, such as you should know your enemy, you should make your enemy live up to his rule book, and you should use ridicule. And right now, the political left, they're science deniers. They don't want to deal in facts and history, and you can have an advantage by just using old-fashioned social science research and truth.
Great. Dr. Swain, what time will you be signing books?
I'm not signing books.
Oh,
at
you're
this
not doing
conference.
books today?
Right.
And you're not either, Austin?
No.
In that case, thank you for being here. We're done. God bless you all. God bless America.